Adolf Hitler believed something most dictators never fully commit to, that adults were already a lost cause. You couldn't fully rewire a grown man's mind, but a child, raised from the very beginning inside the right system, could be built into anything the state wanted. Obedient, fearless, willing to die without asking why. That belief became state policy within months of the Nazis taking power. And the machine built to carry it out was called the Hitlerjugend. Most people today hear that name and picture something almost simple: marching boys, loud slogans, blind obedience. That image isn't false. It's just incomplete. What actually happened inside this organization goes far beyond it. Children pushed toward early relationships the state itself engineered on purpose. Psychological pressure so severe it left permanent scars on the people who lived through it. Discipline enforced through public humiliation, carried out by other children. And by the final year of the war, boys who hadn't even finished growing up, holding rifles on the last defense. Lines of a collapsing Berlin. This is the untold story behind that name, and in most documentaries never finish telling it before we go further. If this is the kind of unfiltered history you're looking for, subscribe now. This channel doesn't stop at the surface. The Hitlerjugend was founded in the summer of 1926, years before Hitler ever became chancellor. In its earliest form, it was a small aggressive youth movement under the leadership of a young ideologue named Baldur von Schirach, regularly clashing in the streets with the youth wings of rival political parties during the chaos of the Weimar Republic. These confrontations were frequent, and on both sides teenagers were seriously hurt. Then, in 1933, everything changed. The Nazis took full control of the government, and within months every competing youth organization in Germany was shut down. Scouting groups, church youth programs, independent sports clubs, all gone. A German boy now had exactly one option: join the Hitlerjugend or belong to nothing at all. For 3 more years, membership was still technically optional. That ended on December 1st, 1936. A new law made participation mandatory for every so-called Aryan child in the country. Refuse and your family faced fines, social exclusion, and unwanted visits from the secret police. By 1939, membership had climbed past 8.5 million children, one of the largest youth movements in modern history, built almost entirely on obligation, not choice. Hitler himself admitted the real goal out loud. In a 1938 speech most people have never heard, he said the purpose of the organization was to separate young people from their families, their social class, their sense of individual identity, until loyalty to the state was the only thing left standing. He wasn't hiding the plan. He was proud of it, but here's what most accounts leave out entirely. Even though joining was legally mandatory, actually being accepted was never guaranteed. And what happened to the children who got turned away is where this story quietly starts to turn dark. Before a boy could be accepted, his family had to produce documents proving his ancestry met the regime's racial standards. That paperwork alone, filed by parents, checked by officials, filled with the names of grandparents most of these children had never even met, could decide a child's entire social future. Then came the physical exam. Chronic illness, visible disability, lasting injury, any of it could get a boy quietly turned away. In the organization's earliest years, before the rules tightened, a minor vision or hearing issue might slip through, but only if it could be blamed on an accident rather than biology. After 1936, even that small exception disappeared completely. In a country where every other youth organization had already been outlawed, rejection didn't mean freedom. It meant becoming the only child in your entire town with nowhere to belong, publicly marked in front of neighbors and classmates as falling short of the state's ideal. And the boys who were accepted were taught explicitly and repeatedly to see those rejected children not as classmates but as lesser, as acceptable targets for contempt, ridicule, and worse. That single idea, that some children deserved cruelty instead of compassion, became the foundation for almost everything else that followed. And nowhere did it do more damage than inside the one place a child should have been safest: their own home. Hitler Youth members were required to attend organized activities twice a week, and family obligations were never accepted as a valid excuse to miss one. Repeated absences meant discipline for the child and financial penalties for the parents. In serious cases, the family could draw direct attention from the Gestapo. The result was a generation of children who spent more structured hours under party supervision than with their own families, and that was never an accident. It was the entire design, working exactly as intended. There was a grim joke that circulated in Germany at the time. If the father belonged to the party, the mother to the Women's League, the daughter to the Girls' Union, and the son to the Hitler Youth, the only place the whole family might actually gather together was a party rally. The consequences went far beyond scheduling, though. Children were actively encouraged, and many did so willingly out of fear or out of genuine conviction, to report disloyal comments made by their own parents, teachers, and neighbors. One remark overheard at the dinner table could end up documented in a government file, delivered by the family's own child, sometimes without the child ever fully understanding the weight of what they'd done. Loyalty inside the group itself was enforced just as ruthlessly. A boy who stayed friendly with someone excluded from the organization risked becoming a target himself. Punishment was frequently physical, and it was often carried out by the boy's own peers on direct orders without hesitation or objection. Standing at attention for hours in painful positions, forced marches under heavy loads, well past the point of exhaustion, public humiliation, dressed up as routine discipline and repeated until it became normal. This is what community actually meant inside the Hitler Youth. Total belonging for the obedient, and total exposure for anyone who wasn't. But the same system that policed these children's friendships reached into something even more personal, and far less discussed their sexuality. What the regime did there stands among the most disturbing, least examined chapters in this organization's entire history. Officially, the Nazi regime preached traditional family values, marriage, large households, respect for motherhood. In practice, the messaging teenagers actually received was riddled with contradictions, and they were left almost entirely on their own to make sense of. Boys and girls in their mid-teens were often given joint lectures encouraging early relationships in the name of the future of the nation. Children, they were told, didn't really belong to their parents at all. They belonged to the state. Births outside of marriage weren't condemned. Unmarried mothers were frequently supported through party-run structures built specifically for this purpose. In some Nazi circles, there was even open discussion about a form of state-sanctioned polygamy for men considered especially desirable by the regime's standards, on the reasoning that more women should be able to bear children for the nation. But the legal marrying age for young men stayed fixed at 21, years after many of these relationships and pregnancies had already happened. In practice, that meant teenagers were pushed by state ideology toward early, often overlapping relationships, while young fathers routinely walked away from any responsibility, reassured by propaganda that the child ultimately belonged to the nation, not to them personally. Now take that exact conditioning. A teenager taught that intimacy carried no real accountability, that his own life expectancy in wartime was short, and that the people around him in occupied territory were somehow lesser human beings, and place it inside the war itself. Historians have documented that this precise combination contributed directly to serious abuses against civilian populations in occupied territories, including instances of sexual violence carried out by young men who had grown up entirely inside the system, shaped by it from childhood. This is the part of the story almost nobody tells, because it's genuinely uncomfortable to sit with, but it's essential to understanding how far this indoctrination actually reached. It didn't just produce obedient soldiers. It reshaped how an entire generation of young men understood intimacy, responsibility, and the basic humanity of the people standing in front of them. And once you understand that, what these same boys became on the battlefield stops feeling surprising and starts feeling almost inevitable. Underneath the hiking trips and singing circles, the Hitler Youth always had a military skeleton running through it. Ranks, uniforms, insignia that mirrored the army almost exactly. Top performers were awarded a ceremonial knife as a badge of honor, worn openly and proudly. Marksmanship and radio training were framed as hobbies, but they were early-stage military preparation, disguised as fun for boys who had no idea what they were actually being prepared for. Once the war started going badly for Germany, that disguise came off completely. By 1942, Training camps were converting entire groups of teenage boys directly into military reserve units, with individual refusal effectively impossible under the organization's own disciplinary rules. By that November, more than 100 such camps were feeding manpower directly into the Air Force and Army, boy by boy, class by class. In early 1943, the regime formally authorized deploying Hitler Youth members in air defense roles across German cities. That same year, an entire Waffen-SS division, the 12th SS, Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, was formed almost entirely from boys born in 1926. Most of its members were 17 years old when they entered combat for the first time. By 1944, the conscription age had dropped to 17 nationwide. By early 1945, with Germany's military situation collapsing, boys as young as 13 were being enrolled in home defense militias. Some received training for resistance operations meant to continue after the country's formal surrender. Far more commonly, they were simply handed a single-use anti-tank weapon and sent out to face advancing armored columns with no real training at all. Allied soldiers who encountered these units weren't struck by their skill. They were struck by how relentlessly these boys kept fighting long after the outcome was already decided, long after any adult unit would have surrendered. The 12th SS Hitlerjugend Division suffered devastating losses in Normandy in 1944 and became known among Allied troops for showing almost no willingness to surrender under any circumstances. In the final defense of Berlin in 1945, teenage members held key bridge crossings for days against advancing Soviet forces, at an enormous and largely pointless cost, in a battle that could never actually have been won. These weren't hardened soldiers. They were children, taught for a decade that dying for the state was the highest form of love a young German could offer, and never given the chance to learn otherwise. So what happened to the people who built this entire machine, once the war finally ended? The answer is almost as unsettling as everything that came before it. After the war, the Allies prosecuted senior Nazi leadership at Nuremberg and pursued war crimes cases across the world for decades afterward. But the Hitler Youth as an institution was in most cases never truly held accountable. Even in documented instances where teenage members had taken part in serious wartime abuses, prosecutors frequently declined to bring charges, largely because the individuals involved had been children, shaped from an early age by a system specifically engineered to strip away independent judgment before they were ever old enough to develop it. It is one of history's most unsettling ironies. A program built entirely to erase a child's capacity for moral choice succeeded so completely that, decades later, that same fact became the very reason almost nobody was ever punished for what it produced. The Hitler Youth wasn't just a youth organization with a troubling reputation. It was a decade-long state-run effort to dismantle a child's conscience piece by piece and rebuild it into something the regime could point wherever it wanted, without hesitation and without question. Understanding exactly how that system worked isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning. Every generation needs to understand what total ideological control over children actually looks like in practice, because the methods behind it don't disappear with time. They simply wait for the next regime willing to use them again. If this is the kind of unfiltered history you come here for, subscribe now, because there's much more of it ahead. Tell us in the comments what part of history you want us to uncover next. Timelines of war.